With summer in full swing, you may feel the need to refresh your closet, but you don't want to waste any money on pieces you'll only wear once or for just one season. Then that's where Quince comes in. Their clothes are timeless, feel luxurious, look elevated, and the quality is way beyond what you'd expect for the price. It's the kind of wardrobe upgrade that just clicks. Think 100% European linen tops starting at $30, washable silk dresses and skirts, and soft cotton sweaters. Versatile warm weather pieces you'll reach for again and again. And the best part with everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middleman, Quince gives you luxury without the markup. Summer for me also means conferences. I'm still taking those Traveler 5 pocket pants along with me, which look good and feel good. But it also means lounging, and that's what that linen shirt is for. Give your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
Amateur Traveler, episode 954. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about monasteries and yaks, a palace, virtual reality coasters, picturesque mountain villages, and the Great Wall, as we go to China, to Beijing, and the Gannan Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture of Gansu. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about China. This is another solo episode of Amateur Traveler, although I'll be helped by some of my traveling companions and guides. But I'm back this week from a 2-week trip in China. And it was a press trip. It was sponsored by the Chinese Tourism Board. And really, it was 3 different trips. And so we started with 3 days and 3 nights in Beijing. And then we went to the province of Gansu. And I'll be talking a lot more about Gansu. And the first thing that we did when we got there, we flew from Beijing to Lanzhou, is we headed south into the Gannan Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture. So this is a Tibetan region, but it is not Tibet. And we are on the edge of the plateau of Tibet here, and we'll talk more about why there is a Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture outside of Tibet. And then we headed back to Lanzhou, and from there we headed west out into the Silk Road. And this is a historic part of the Silk Road, the innermost Chinese part of the Silk Road. And we did a week there seeing a number of different sites, including UNESCO World Heritage Sites and geoparks. So I'm going to divide up this particular episode into 3 parts for those 3 regions. This episode will deal with Beijing and Gannan, and then the next episode will deal with that Silk Road part of our trip. So let's start with Beijing. Beijing is a place that I had been to before, although the last time I was there was in 2011 on a tour with my wife and son. And Beijing has changed a bit since then. Since that time, there was the Olympics. And when the Olympics happened in Beijing, there were a number of different changes put in place. Probably the most notable would be air quality. When I was there in 2011, the first day we came in, the air quality was so bad you couldn't see one end of the airport from the other. And it's a big airport, but that's still pretty bad air quality. For the Olympics, they really cleaned that up and then have kept some of those changes they made. So some of the changes they did for the Olympics is they had cars that drove on gasoline could only drive every other day. They've relaxed that, but still, if you have a gasoline car in Beijing, then the last digit of your license plate indicates one day of the week you can't drive. but there are also a lot more electric cars on the road than there were back in 2011. And you can tell that on the streets because they have two different color license plates: green license plates for electric cars and blue license plates for gasoline powered cars, or diesel, I imagine. And there are a lot of electric cars on the road, most of these of Chinese manufacture. And then the other thing that they did for the Olympics that they have kept is they moved a lot of the heavy industry that was in Beijing out to other portions of China. Now, hopefully when they moved it out there, they didn't just move the pollution problem, but they updated the factories with better pollution control. And we had a chance to visit one of those old factories on our trip, and that was actually an interesting highlight that is not something I had done previously. If you're heading to Beijing, there are two great big airports now in Beijing, so it's easier to get connections internationally. And we did fly into Beijing. We were fortunate enough to fly in business class, and that's nice because it's a 15-hour flight. And my thanks to Director Wu from Chinese Tourism for paying for that, because that's fairly rare on press trips and very, very nice. We flew in as a group of 5 journalists from Los Angeles and met up with the head of the Chinese Tourism Board from Los Angeles in Beijing briefly. And then he joined us for the Gansu region portion of the trip. Very easy to get to the city. You are going to be flying for quite a few hours if you're coming from the US or from Europe. There are a lot of things to do in Beijing, even if you don't like history. But if you like history, Beijing, or Dadu as it was originally, has been the capital of China most of the time since roughly 1272, when Kublai Khan, who was a Mongol ruler, moved the capital to Beijing. It was in Nanjing for a few years in the late 1300s and in the 1900s, but predominantly it's been in Beijing through the Yuan, Ming, Qing dynasties, and also the People's Republic of China. And so there are a lot of things in the city if you like history. There are 7 different UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the region of Beijing. We only get to 3 of them on this trip. And the first thing we did was, in fact, probably the most significant site in Beijing historically, and that's the Forbidden City. And let me introduce you to the first of my traveling companions for whom that was a highlight.
My name is Michael Solander. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and this was my first visit to China. And I came with a small group of strangers who are now friends. The whole trip, we were here about 13, 14 days. And for me, there were several highlights. In terms of our 3 days in Beijing, so much captivated by the Forbidden City. Even though it was quite hot, quite warm when we were here, we had a super guide. The scope and the magnitude, just the vastness of it and the tremendous architecture. We spent almost 3/4 of a day, close to 3/4 of a day there, 4 or 5 hours. And it was just a super, super experience for me. Really enjoyed it. Really got a lot of history and culture from that.
If you are not familiar with the Forbidden City, this is now the Palace Museum, I should say, and it was the imperial palace for the Qing and the Ming emperors, about 24 different emperors across a little more than 500 years. Built in the early 1400s, finished in 1420, and was the seat of imperial power until 1924, when China became a republic. It is big. The whole area is about 720,000 square meters, or about 7.75 million square feet. So not small, was built to display imperial power. Half of the area is the public part, with great big imposing buildings that are intended to awe people. And then half of it was the private quarters for the imperial family, the emperor, the empress, and all the concubines. The whole complex is rectangular, about 960 meters north to south and 750 meters east to west. Or for those of us who think in feet, that's roughly 3,150 feet by 2,460 feet. And all of that surrounded by a wall, and all of that surrounded by a moat. It has 980 buildings and is said to have 9,999 rooms, or one short than 10,000. And the idea here is that the Jade Emperor, the Emperor of Heaven, had 10,000 rooms, and so The son of the Jade Emperor, the Emperor of China, had one less. I'm not sure that's an actual number of rooms, but I wasn't going to count them. And our guide, Jerry, who named himself after Jerry Seinfeld when he was studying English on his own, was telling us how you can tell which are the most important buildings in the complex.
Finally, we officially in the Forbidden City after all those walking. The building behind of me is called Hall of Supreme Harmony. Every building have a name. So especially this one of those big palaces along the central line of Beijing. So this is the largest, tallest building in the whole Forbidden City. How can we tell it's important building or not important building in the future? When we go to other part of China, when we finally see some other building, there are three things you check on. Firstly, you guys pay attention. How many marble terraces underneath of the architect? 1, 2, 3. Secondly, you double count how many layer of roof on the top of the building. 1, 2, double layer of roof. So that two feature makes this building important. If there's two buildings, same number of terraces, same number of roof, which one got more important? You have to go even closer. You check how many little figurines standing on the roof line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I count 5. Some of you might see there were 6 of them because we don't count the first one. First one is immortal, red and phoenix, leading the team. It's not counted like a mystical creature. So like a god leading the team. So that building, Hall of Supreme Harmony, that's the only building, whole Beijing, imperial palace, have 10 figurines. Nobody more than 10. The largest number is supposed to be 9, but why this is 10? So originally designed 600 years ago, firstly settled down with 9 only. Dragon, phoenix, lion, horses, other things. Behind all together it's 9. But only 100 days later, burned down. And then rebuilt, burned down, rebuilt. 3 times burned down, 3 times rebuilt. Until the emperor in Qing dynasty had enough concerns. I don't want too much worry about this building, burned it down. So what he did, he put one more figure at the end of the queue. And this one is God of Lightning. You know, in American Marvel superhero, there's a man, Thor, with hammers. You know that guy?
Yeah, Thor.
Thor. God of Lightning. So since then, we put Chinese God of Lightning on the top of the roof line. This building never got burned down for 200 years. No burn down, no rebuild.
I appreciated having a guide like Jerry when we visited the Forbidden City because those details, like what is on the eaves of the building and that how many figures there designate how important the building is not something that I would even have noticed. One of the other things we learned is that the emperor had, in the Ming Dynasty, over 27 different bed alcoves in 9 different rooms on 2 different levels in the Palace of Heavenly Purity, where the emperor slept. And part of this reason was just for security, so that you wouldn't know necessarily where to find the emperor were you to try and assassinate the emperor. And this is because of an assassination attempt that happened back in the middle of the 1500s. The Forbidden City was obviously the center of the city in Beijing. And Jerry told us how that city was laid out.
600 years ago, the Ming Dynasty set Beijing as capital. They made Beijing lay out like a square shape. And then they put a wall all the way around it. And the gate tower in south, gate tower in north, east, west. Different gates used by different people, reserved for different purpose. Military gate, when emperor sending army go out for fighting, the military always travel from north gate. So for military transportation, we have a nickname for the North Gate, Victory Gate. All the royal water, the water for emperor drink in the palace, the water is from northwest of the city, spring. So they transport the water through the West Gate. West Gate is Water Gate. And South Gate, when emperor leaving the city from the palace, he travel strictly from the South Gate. So South Gate, Emperor Gate, Wood Gate, White Wood Gate, the Grand Canal of China ends to Beijing. So the ends to the East Gate. So that all the heavy merchandise travel into the city from East Gate, especially the big logs transported from South China. So we call Wood Gate. I want to repeat it. Military Gate, Water Gate, Emperor Gate, Wood Gate. So in between, the wall linking up. But now, only North Gate, South Gate still there.
The last time I was in Beijing, we did enter into the Forbidden City through the South Gate, which connects it to Tiananmen Square. And Tiananmen Square is right next to the National Museum of China, the Monument to the People's Heroes, the Great Hall of the People, which is where China is governed from, and then also the Mausoleum of Mao Zedong. As Jerry was saying, there is a main meridian that runs north to south through Tiananmen Square, through the Forbidden City. Below that, just off that same meridian, is the Temple of Heaven, which is another UNESCO site. We did not visit it on this trip, but I recommend it. It's in the middle of a park. You can see people doing their Tai Chi and just kind of a sample of everyday life there. And then north of the Forbidden City is Jingshan Park. We did not go there this time. It's a hill to climb, and we were there in July. And I don't recommend July in Beijing. It is hot and humid. By the time we saw the Forbidden City, we needed some cold water and a break. But if you go there in a better time of year, you can climb up that park, which is where all the excavation to build the Forbidden City were dumped there. So there is a hill from which you can see the Forbidden City, and I would recommend it. One thing to note, this was our first stop at any major attraction, and we learned here that in addition to buying a ticket for the attraction, you also do have to have your passport as an international traveler at this and really at any major site in China these days. So that's another thing that had changed since my last visit there. Further north from there, you'll find the Drum Tower, which is also part of that Beijing Meridian World Heritage Site. We climbed up the Drum Tower to see the big drums up there, to see a presentation of what they did for ancient timekeeping, and then also to get a great view of Beijing from the Drum Tower. We landed in Beijing at about 5 a.m. in the morning, took a break at the hotel, which was the Crown Plaza Beijing, lovely hotel on the second ring road. And then we did all that the first day. The next day, we went out to the Great Wall of China, as David will tell you.
I'm David Lang. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a Chinese American. I have been obviously to China many times, but Beijing last time was before COVID. So there's a lot of new things that you've seen during this trip. One is the new portion of the Great Wall, which I have not visited before. We always went to the one that is a lot of touristy. This time we went to a session which we found a lot of cats, which was very interesting. Stray cats, very friendly. It's a difficult climb, but unfortunately the weather that day when we visited is not most ideal, but it's an experience. And also the historic street not that far away from the Great Wall, I found it interesting. Used to be an old camel route where traders from afar came to Beijing and unloaded goods. So there's a lot of memories and history associated with that.
It is summer, and I'm careful with my skin in terms of skincare. I wear sunscreen, I wear a hat, but also I want to take care of my skin afterwards. OneSkin's mineral SPF line goes beyond sun protection. It helps prevent collagen loss, reduce inflammation, and even repair past damage at the cellular level using their OS1 peptide, which is why OneSkin is part of my morning skin routine. With lightweight formulas and added antioxidants like vitamin C, this sun care works like advanced skincare. After testing the efficacy of more than 900 so-called anti-aging peptides, they developed OS1 peptide, the first ingredient to reverse the skin's biological age. OneSkin is the world's first longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. For a limited time, you could try OneSkin with 15% off using code TRAVELER at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code TRAVELER. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support this show by telling them I sent you. And thanks to OneSkin for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
This episode is brought to you by Starbucks. Smooth, bright, deliciously crafted. Introducing Starbucks Sansera Blend, their smoothest, brightest coffee yet. It's a new kind of light roast, one that's packed with so much flavor, it shines no matter how you brew it. So go ahead and try it hot, iced, black, or with a splash of creamer. Visit athome.starbucks.com/Sansera-blend-coffee to bring Starbucks Sansera Blend home.
So, as David mentioned, instead of going to the most visited part of the Great Wall, which is Badaling, and it's most visited because that's where Mao visited the walls. So, a lot of Chinese visitors go there, and it also is just closer to Beijing. We went out to Mutianyu, and Mutianyu is where I had visited the Great Wall before. When I was there with my wife and son, we climbed up to the Great Wall. This time we were smarter and we took the cable car up, but we happened to be there in the rain. So I have pictures from the first time I was at the Great Wall where you could see for miles, and then I have pictures from this time where you could see maybe 100 feet. Still lovely, still interesting to be on the Great Wall, but a very different view. And also because it was raining, we could not do the fun toboggan ride down at Mutianyu, which I did last time I was there. And you can find that video in a post that I will link from the show notes about the intrepid trip I did to Beijing, Xi'an, Suzhou, and Shanghai, which was that first trip I've been referring to. Chairman Mao once said that every great man should see the Great Wall, and at the top of the Great Wall in Mutianyu is the quote from Mao in Chinese, and a lot of the local people were lining up to get their picture taken with that quote. So I say this is the Great Wall. Interesting thing about this trip is we saw two different Great Walls. This is the Ming Dynasty Great Wall, which is the second one that was built. The Ming Dynasty kicked out the Mongols, the descendants of Kublai Khan, and they built a wall to keep the Mongols back up north. And that's the one that you know. But later on in the trip, we'll talk about the first Great Wall. And then we went in, as David was talking about, into Beijing, back to Beijing, to some of the old hutongs. And the hutongs were the old neighborhoods in Beijing before all the new construction in the PRC era. Old neighborhoods with smaller buildings. And we went to an area that has been preserved, and it's near the Ten Temple Sea area. And the Ten Temple Sea is an interior lake. And it's a beautiful area with nightlife. And we viewed that area from a bicycle rickshaw ride, which is great fun. But it's a very crowded, very teeming, very popular tourist area. The last time I was there, we visited that area with a friend who was living in Beijing, who took us out there for the nightlife. I do recommend that area, and the bicycle rickshaw was interesting. Although it'd be also nice to have a walking tour of that area, because the bicycle rickshaw, you're not really going to learn anything about the hutongs per se, which you would on a walking tour. And the bicycle rickshaw will run you about $40 for a half-hour tour. The next day, we headed to the far western reaches of Beijing to the Fahai Temple. And this is a Ming Dynasty temple from the 1400s. And it's best known for its well-preserved Buddhist frescoes. Now, it's a difficult one to visit because they only let in 70 people a day, but you can visit and see a replica of it. It's actually a lot easier to see the replica because it's in a well-lit space, where when you're visiting the originals, you have a guide who is showing you around, who is pointing out things with a flashlight because it's in basically a dark room. But they're interesting, elaborate murals that you really do need a guide to sort of explain what's going on in the mythology and the cosmology of Buddhism, unless you're very fluent in those things. But very interesting to see. And there was also a tourist street right near there where we had lunch that is hardly visited at all. It's a beautiful little tourist street with different shops and restaurants and such. But since you're so far from the center of town, it was very uncrowded compared to so many things that we had seen in China so far. And then we made a very unusual stop. I mentioned that there were factories that were shut down, and one of these factories, the Shougang #1 blast furnace, has been turned into a sci-fi metaverse park called So Real. And so this is a park that combines VR and AR and holography, and is really just this vast interior amusement park where you can ride on virtual rides. I did a virtual Aladdin carpet ride and a virtual arcade where we were shooting at the invading tanks, but you can also do a virtual skydiving and racing and all sorts of different things. It's a fascinating place. I was surprised that Michael Solander didn't name this as his favorite thing in Beijing because he was over the moon excited about it. Now, one thing I will say is, as someone who tips the scale at more than 90 kilograms or 198 pounds, I couldn't ride some of the rides because I was just too big. So this was definitely a ride that was made for more Chinese-sized people, although Chinese people are certainly getting larger. But a very interesting space, not a cheap destination, with prices starting at 400 RMB per person, which is about $50. But more than $1 billion went into this 200,000 square foot space. Very little English available in this, but a fascinating modern amusement space. Those were the sites we saw in Beijing. I would also recommend, if you were there for a couple more days, I personally would see some more of the UNESCO World Heritage sites like the Ming tombs and the Summer Palace. But we should also mention food, which was a highlight for this particular trip.
I'm Michael Snell. I'm a travel photographer from Lawrence, Kansas, just outside of Kansas City. I believe I've been to China half a dozen times. This is my 6th or 7th trip, I believe. From Beijing, I think there were a lot of highlights. The Great Wall, of course, was fantastic. So many great things to see. But I think a highlight for me was the food. I saw a lot of influences from regions I visited previously, other parts of China, integrated into what became a Beijing version of those foods that I found really interesting. So I think food was maybe my highlight there.
So in addition to having Peking duck, as one has to have when you're in Beijing, we also had hot pot, we also had Szechuan Manchurian food, which was new to me. So those are the kind of influences that Michael is talking about. Also, when we were at the Peking duck restaurant, we were seeing a Szechuan face-changing artist. And if you haven't seen this, it's an artist who has masks on and very rapidly is changing between masks in between a blink of an eye, so you can't tell. It's an interesting performance. Traffic is serious in Beijing, so I would recommend you stay inside the second ring road or on that as we did, or that you stay very near a metro line so that you can more easily get into the center of the city. But moving on, I want to focus on the Gannan Tibetan Autonomous Region as the second part of this trip. We flew from Beijing to Lanzhou, but I don't want to focus on what we did in Lanzhou in this part of the tour. I'm going to do that when we're talking about the Silk Road. But from Lanzhou, we got into a van because the Gannan region is not connected by high-speed train yet, but it will be connected in 2027. So this is one of those regions that I'm going to recommend that you go, but it's a little more difficult to go now, but you might want to go before the high-speed train hits and the region changes. So this particular autonomous region is a little over 50%, about 51, 52% Tibetan, and it goes back to the 700s to 800s when a large region of Western China was ruled by the Tibetan Empire. Basically all of Qinghai, Gansu, Sichuan, Yunnan, as well as what is now the Tibetan Autonomous Region, were all this one empire that faded starting in the 800s, but still has left Tibetan people all over Western China. This region is on the edges of the Plateau of Tibet, and I have a personal connection with the Plateau of Tibet because back in, I want to say 5th grade, our geography teacher gave us an assignment to draw a map of a region of the world that was not defined by political boundaries. Most of the smart kids chose Australia or someplace that was defined by water, which is fairly simple, but I chose the Plateau of Tibet and basically drew a map of this region in Western China, or central China really, that is at 10,000 feet or higher. And I did not know that the next part of the assignment was going to be, okay, now go plan a trip to the Plateau of Tibet. And so I had to actually go to a travel agent here as a 10-year-old and figure out how much it would cost and how I would get to the Plateau of Tibet. I have now finally got there some years later, But it was a special trip for me because this is a region that I've known about at least since I was 10. And to be on even on the border of the Plateau of Tibet is very interesting because we're talking about a region where at this time of year there were these lush green fields going on for miles and then hills starting up from there. But you're at like 10,000 feet. We were at 10 or even 11,000 feet as we were doing much of this particular trip. And then you'd see big herds of yaks or you'd see yurts, but the yurts that we were seeing were predominantly tourist yurts. So you could go and you could have a Tibetan-like experience by staying in one of these yurts and ride horses and things like that. So very interesting region and very much influenced still by Buddhism. Michael Snell had this to say.
In the Tibetan region, it had to be the architecture of the temples, I think, for me. It's just interesting to see the influence of the different cultures, learn more about the Tibetan culture. It was different than most any other part of China that I've seen. I think architecturally, scenically, it was really interesting and just felt really off the main trail. It felt like we were seeing some things that a lot of other people haven't discovered yet. That may change because we saw them building the high-speed rail. But for now, it was a nice off-the-beaten-track destination, I think.
The first of the monasteries that we went to was the Lebrang Monastery in Xiahe. And my apologies for all my Mandarin pronunciation. I have studied a little Mandarin in night school, but don't speak it. And Xiahe was about 3-hour drive from Lanzhou. It used to be about 8 hours drive until they put in the new highways. So it is a lot easier to access now than it used to be. But again, this entire trip, as we were going along, they were building the high-speed rail next to the highway. And I mean the entire distance. So it's an amazing construction project. I don't know how many people are working on this because we were traveling for something like 16 hours of driving and constantly seeing new construction going along on this high-speed rail that will open up in 2 years. The Lebrang Monastery is about 9,500 feet above sea level, or about 2,900 meters in the grassland valleys here of the Tibetan Plateau. And it is the largest Buddhist monastery outside of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. There used to be about 4,000 monks there, and I think today they told us there were 1,400 monks still there. And it's quite a large monastery. As you approach it, there's the world's longest prayer wheel corridor. So there's a corridor with 2,000 different prayer wheels and people walking by, spinning all of these, spinning them clockwise. And you spin things clockwise. You also walk around buildings clockwise, or you walk around the whole complex clockwise to bring luck. And so we saw quite a few people who were doing that. The monastery dates back to the early 1700s, and it's the newest of the Buddhist traditions. It's the Gelugpa school of Buddhism, sometimes called the Yellow Hat School. And the Gelugpa was founded in the early 1400s, and it emphasizes a strict monastic discipline. So you can tour the monastery grounds. You need a ticket to do so. They sell the tickets just like it's another attraction. You can go into the temples. Much of the monastery grounds are where the monks live. You can't go in those. And you can't take pictures inside the temples themselves. You can take pictures right up until the transom that enters the temple. You can get an English-speaking tour. They apparently have one English-speaking monk. We took a tour from him. His English was okay. We did have some communication issues. Some of them, I think, were spiritual in nature, just in terms of talking in different ways, and some were definitely understanding. I recall one time where one of the Michaels pointed at a statue and said, "How old is that Buddha?" And the answer was, "Well, that's not really Buddha," which we knew, but we still didn't get an answer how old the statue was. Besides the temples, I think there were two particular buildings that were interesting where we were allowed to take pictures inside. One of them was a display of brightly painted floral and Buddha depictions. These were statues, but they were temporary statues made out of yak butter. It's the strangest thing. They didn't look like they were butter statues like the butter heads at the Minnesota State Fair, but they were apparently made with yak butter and salt and then very brightly painted. But they only last for a season. They're only for 1 year. And this one particular room was filled with these brightly colored depictions of the Buddha or of various Buddhas and deities and spirits within the Buddha cosmology. And then they had another room which was more of a museum that had various historical artifacts that was also interesting. Throughout this Gannan region, you're going to see the Chinese characters, and then you're also going to see the Tibetan characters, which derive from Sanskrit. So they're very much influenced by India, as Buddhism obviously itself is, since that's where Buddhism originates. And we'll talk more about the origination of Buddhism within China next week when we talk about the Silk Road, because that's how Buddhism came into China. We were supposed to have an experience out on the Sanghe grasslands that night, which would be more of an introduction into that culture, including a bonfire experience. But I think the altitude was kind of kicking our butt at that point. So we canceled that experience, which probably is just as well because we were going even higher up the next day. So the next day we drove, was supposed to be about 3.5 hours to Longmusi town with a stop along the ways at a wetlands. There's a statue of, I think it's geese, as I recall, that seems to be closed. A lot of people stopping and walking out there somehow, but we were being turned away there. So we did not get to explore the wetlands. It would be mostly a bird watching experience. And so there are bird watching experiences there when that is open, which it wasn't when we were there.
The McDonald's snack wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch snack wrap. Spicy snack wrap. You broke the internet. For a snack. Snack wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
We then ran into a traffic jam, which changed our plans a little bit. We ended up eating in a town way off the grid that was not part of our plan, that was just along the highway there as we waited for the traffic to clear, because there's really just one road. And if you look at your navigation app for another route, there is no other route. There's really just one road going up these valleys. And if that road is clogged, then you're not going anywhere, or you're going to wait until the high-speed rail gets there. Longmusi is a destination that was on the backpacker map in the 50s because of a book that came out in 1952 by Robert Eckfall, which was his travel memoirs. He was an American missionary / anthropologist, and he wrote Tibetan Skylines, and he lived in this region among the nomads for years, and then wrote about this region and really put it on the map for Western readers for the first time. So backpackers would travel to this remote region, even more remote at the time. There was one restaurant there that got into the yak burger business to satisfy the taste of their Western visitors. But this particular town of Longmusi has 2 different monasteries, and this town straddles the Gansu-Sichuan border. It's at 3,300 meters or 10,800 feet. By the time we walked up to the monastery on the Gansu side, it was over 11,000 feet. And this happened to be a day when I was fighting a cold. It was tough. There was not a lot of oxygen in the air you were getting up there. A lot of breathing for no particularly good reason. One of the members of the press group didn't make the hike up, and David made the hike about, I think, halfway up, and I made it to the top, but it took me a while to get there. But it's a very, very beautiful city. It's really interesting. If you look one way beyond the city at the green hills followed by the jagged granite mountains, it looks like you could be in Switzerland. And then if you look the other direction, there are red rocks that Michael Snell thought looked just like Sedona. And so very pretty valley. And then within this, the monastery that we went to is probably less prominent than the Lebrang Monastery. It's even more ornate. And so the various buildings there are all topped with gold roofs. And so you get these gold roof temples, and in the background, these just spectacularly beautiful mountains, both the style that looks like Switzerland and the style that looks like. And then, as always, inside of these temples, these elaborate paintings with bright colors that tell you things about Buddhism. Like one particular painting was a wheel that depicted the world according to Buddhism and the different things that people might be involved in. It was useful to have Peter, who was our guide for this whole second half of the trip, both this time here in Gannan as well as the Silk Road portion of the trip. And Peter was able to explain some of what this cosmology meant, what it means in terms of the Buddhism faith, of all the different things that of what is desirable within a Buddhist life. And it is a very useful spot. I would say any of these Buddhist temples, it's very useful to have a guide, useful for have somebody who knows what they're looking at and can explain them, because they're very complicated pictures. And obviously they're not something that is accessible to someone like me who doesn't have any training in Buddhism. After we toured the monastery, we got back in our van and we headed to Daegu, another hour or so away. And interesting, we were going through from one valley to another and following along the course of a river, and I could have sworn that I was in the Sierras in California. Very green hills, little tiny river going through it. Could have been anywhere. A beautiful, different drive to go here to Daegu. We stayed in a hotel in Daegu. I want to mention a little bit about hotels. When we were in Beijing, we stayed in the Crown Plaza, as I think I mentioned, which is a very Western-style hotel, lovely hotel, incredible brunch with both Chinese and Western entrees available. As we went to Lanzhou, we stayed in another lovely Western-style hotel, though not a Western brand. Very good breakfast again, very modern hotel. But as we headed here into the Gannan region, we were seeing hotels that were a little older and much more focused at a Chinese tourist. And so, for instance, you're not going to find non-smoking rooms, non-smoking floors, Western dishes at breakfast. I think the hotel we stayed at in Daegu, you could have done a good Rorschach test from the stains on the carpet. I expect a lot of these hotels to get upgraded when the high-speed rail goes through. I would stay there again. There weren't any problems with them, but you're a little bit off the tourist route at this point. And even the Silk Road portion of the trip, which is much more touristed now than this region here in the Gannan region, we were still dealing with hotels that were more focused on a Chinese tourist than, for instance, a Western tourist. Again, comfortable enough, wouldn't have a problem staying there, but your beds are going to be very firm, as is the Chinese model, and your breakfasts are going to be Chinese breakfasts. A lot of the hotels do have private dining available in the evenings. We ate in a number of the hotels, and they were just wonderful dishes, wonderful dinners. Everywhere we ate, we had really good food. That was really not a problem in terms of finding food that was tasty and plentiful in this region. But you're going to need to use your translation app. If you're traveling independently, don't expect that the people even in the hotel lobby are necessarily going to speak English. And don't expect that the sign at the different attractions is necessarily going to be in English. You'll see a lot of English in China, but they're just not getting a lot of Western tourists at this point. We saw at least 2 Western tourists at that tour that we did at the Lebrang Monastery, and the only Western tourists we saw in the Gannan region over the course of 3 days. Also, outside your hotel room, if you find a toilet that's not a squatty potty, you can consider yourself fortunate. That's just not what the people are used to, and so that's just not what you're going to find. Our next day was a highlight for this part of the trip, both for David and for Michael Solander.
So the Gannan region, the first time I visited it, I was most impressed with the beautiful town of Sangana. It was a difficult climb, but I think it's worthy to climb in steps and see the view from above. I know very little about that region before I came, so I learned obviously a lot from this trip. the monasteries, the history is just very impressive.
In terms of the middle part of our trip, we went to a small, very scenic part of the world here in China called Jiangnan. Really wonderful nature hike, beautiful scenery, overlooking a valley with 3 villages, followed by just a great lunch with new friends. It was a tremendous scenic drive out there along a river, and it was a tremendous hike. Just really, the topography and the geography here, very impressive.
Remember how pretty I said the second monastery we went was, with the beautiful mountains in the background that could have been Switzerland. The towns in the valley of Jagannath, which means stone box in Tibetan, are even more beautiful. So this is a region that is quite well known within China. We saw tour buses with license plates that our Mandarin speakers could identify as being from all over China, people who had driven even from Beijing, which is quite a long drive from Jagannath. Again, we didn't see any Western tourists, but the National Geographic did write about this area way back in 1922, comparing it to the Garden of Eden, and including it later on in a listing of China's 50 landscapes to see in a lifetime. So very, very beautiful town. And what there is to do in this town predominantly is sightseeing. And so I would recommend you do the hike up to the viewing platform that looks down over the town. Now, there are buses, green buses, that can shuttle you up to most of the way up to that platform. I would recommend you don't take them. We did not take them, and I found that many of the most beautiful views and the least crowds were the path that we went up, which was to the left of where those green buses went. They went up into the mountains to some viewing platforms there. Most people were on the buses, so they were missing it. And those were some of the best views. In fact, they were better than when we got up to the top to the viewing platform. So we did kind of a big circle route where we came up the left part of one of the gorges and then up over the top to the viewing platform and then down from there back into the village. And on your way down now, you've got more crowds, but you're heading downhill, so it's easier. And then you also have a lot of vendors who are selling things. That's the much more touristy route. So good to go up one way that without the tourists and down the other way with the tourists, but just gorgeous views with jagged mountains behind these little villages. The artwork that I'm going to use for this episode is going to be some of the pictures from Jagannath. By the way, all of the pictures I ever take on all my travels are all online, and I'll put a link to where the photos are, but travelphotos.amateurtraveler.com is all my travel photos. But I'll put a link to these pictures from this part of the China trip if you're interested in seeing more pictures of these various regions I'm talking about. And all the hiking we were doing at this day started at something like 10,000 feet. Michael Snell showed me how I could use one of the complications on an Apple Watch face so that I could show the elevation on my watch. And you wouldn't believe how many times we looked at our watch to see how high up we were. At this point, we were as far away from Lanzhou as we were going to get, and we headed back towards that direction. It was going to take us a whole day to drive there, but we first headed to Hezhou, which is the capital of the Gannan Tibetan Autonomous Region. It's a city of only about 100,000 people. There's only 700,000 total in the whole autonomous region, which for China is very small. Remember, this is a country that about 3 to 5 years ago built 100 different airports in cities of more than 1 million in population, and you probably haven't heard of most of those. So very small region in terms of population, but of course we're up at elevation and we've got a lot of mountains and green pastures and things like that, so not a very populous region. While we were in the capital city, we did go out to a temporary night market. We'll do more night markets in next week's episode, but just love hanging out in some of the night markets and seeing the different food that was available. There was also clothing available for sale, but this was a temporary one, while some of the ones I'll talk about next week are ones that are always there and that you can enjoy. Before we headed out of town, we made a quick stop at the Milarepa Palace, and this is an unusual building. It is a Buddhist temple, but it's 9 stories tall and has a tower shape. And the story behind it is that Milarepa was a prince who was a child when his father died. Some of his father's property was taken over by family members. and it left him thirsting for revenge. And so when he grew up, he assassinated members of his own family and then repented when he got older and wanted to cleanse his karma, that Buddhist idea that what you do to others happens to you. And so he went to purify himself by becoming a monk and was told by his masters to build temples with his own hands, and then was told to knock them down and start again. And finally, after he built this tower and didn't complain at all about the assignment, this fourth building was left standing, and that's the Milarepa Palace, which is really a temple. And lots of people were walking around, again, the building in a clockwise direction as we went in the morning. Some people were prostrating themselves in front of the building. There was smoke coming out from some sort of incense or whatever the inside. We did not visit the interior. We just didn't have time because of the long drive that we had ahead of us. One thing you need to be aware of is that you're going to have trouble getting to your regular internet sites when you're in China because of the Great Firewall of China. Even with a VPN, which I was using successfully about half the time, I just wasn't able to get to a lot of places on the internet. One thing that worked very well in China was the T-Mobile International Plan, which is no additional charge for T-Mobile users. And that let us, from the moment the plane landed in Beijing, to turn our phones and use the cellular system as long as there were cellular signals available. The first 5 gigabytes were at high speed, and then they may step you down to a slower connection. But great connectivity. Better even than one of the eSIMs that I bought from Saley, who used to be a sponsor of this show. And strangely enough, the T-Mobile connection got around for some reason the Great Firewall of China. I don't know how that works legally, but we could get to all the sites we wanted to from that. Although even with that, you'd have some sites that say we're just not available in China. So you're going to have some more difficulties getting to your usual places on the internet from China. That's just something you need to be aware of if you're going to travel to China. For cash, I had good luck getting out money at one ATM and no luck at another ATM. The going rate for RMB, the Chinese currency, was about 7.5 to 1 to the dollar, and things were relatively inexpensive there. It is a budget destination from that point of view. Obviously, you've got to get there, but once you're there, food is going to be inexpensive, and anything you're buying there is going to be pretty inexpensive as well. We did not spend a lot of time shopping, but I can imagine that some of you will, and it's going to be a good place to shop as far as bargains go when you're in China. One issue that you need to be aware of that is a relatively new issue is as of June 28th, there were new regulations regarding power banks. That's the portable battery that you have that you can use to recharge your iPhone, for instance, or your Android phone. And in China right now, if you're flying domestically, if that power bank doesn't say CCC on it, which is a Chinese certification, it may be confiscated. We had 5 different power banks. All but one of them were confiscated. All the 4 that were confiscated were from China, ironically. And the one that was not was one of the ones that I had that was from Europe. And again, ironically, that was the only one that had a problem where it seemed to overheat and expanded, as you don't want lithium batteries to do, and I needed to throw it away during my trip. So that's something to watch out for if you're going to be traveling there in the near future. We're seeing those regulations coming up in other places in the world too because of fires on airplanes with those kind of power banks. So look into that before you bring one to China on your next trip. And again, that's the first week of a 2-week trip, and next week we'll cover the rest of the itinerary as we explore the Silk Road in one of China's most historic regions. Just one word about Gansu. Gansu is, of the provinces of China, the 7th largest, so not the largest province. And when we're counting the size of provinces, we're excluding the 3 large self-autonomous regions of Xinjiang, Tibet, and Inner Mongolia. But even with that, it has the 2nd largest number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And so I'm going to be talking about more that I visited on this trip, as well as 2 different UNESCO geoparks. So you're going to want to hear that in next week's episode. As I go to wrap this one up, you know those questions that I stick other people with. You're standing in the prettiest spot on the whole itinerary. Where are you standing and what are you looking at? And that's going to be Jagannath. That is just a jaw-dropping, beautiful sight. One thing that makes me laugh and say, only in the Gannan province of China, it's got to be eating a lot of yak. Yak was definitely on the menu in a way that it is not at home. And if I had to summarize the region in 3 words, I would say isolated, elevated, and Buddhist. That really strong Buddhist heritage really comes through in that Tibetan region. Again, a destination you might want to get to now before the crowds do, or wait until the high-speed rail gets there in 2027 when it's going to be easier and probably a lot more popular.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there's one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
Empower. Jen has ordered a decadent seafood tower, king crab legs, lobster tails, and a waterfall of caviar. Pricey? You bet. But Jen worked with Empower on her savings and investment strategy and planned for splurges like these. She got good at money, so she can be a little bad. Ooh, champagne. Empower. Invest well, live a little. Start today at empower.com.
Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risk. You may lose money. Advisory services are provided for a fee by Empower Advisory Group, LLC, EAG, a registered investment advisor with the Securities and Exchange Commission. OMG, those shrimps are really jumbo.
My thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a patron of the show and what that entails, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. New on the Amateur Traveler blog since the last episode, I think, is an article about things you need to know before you moved to Mexico. And then this week, I am traveling to Peru to do a cruise with G Adventures on the Amazon. So I'm trying to get a lot of things done, including the other half of this particular trip before I go. Speaking of trips, if you want to travel with me to the Silk Road, we're going to be talking about the Silk Road next week, but you can go with me next year in May to Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan with the Amateur Traveler trip. Go to amateurtraveler.com/trips to learn more. And with that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.